Last time, we learned how we can instantiate an object using a constructor. This time, we're going to actually interact with that object we instantiated to access information about its state. And you should do an in-video quiz to tell me that you understand what the terminology is that we use to talk about accessing state of an object. Of course, the answer is properties. So if we look at the DEC documentation, we see that it actually only exposes a single property. It exposes the empty property. And so that's the property we're going to access here. As we read the documentation, there are a few pieces of information that are important. The first is this thing called bool, and we haven't actually talked about the bool data type yet. We'll do that in the next module. So this is just a data type that can either be true or false. And the bool here in this documentation says that this property is a bool. So if we read or get this property, it's going to give us true or false. We'll worry about setting or writing properties later because we can't do it with this property. And that is shown by the fact that it only lists get in the list of things we can do with this property. So if it lists get, we can read it. If it lists set, we can write it. And if it lists both, we can both read it and write it. So given that information, we have enough information to actually go write some code to access this property. We'll start with the code we ended with last time, and we'll add an access to the DEC empty property, and we'll print that out as well. So I'll add a comment here, and we'll stop printing out the DEC. And in fact, I'll add a blank line as well. And so here we'll say access and print empty value. So one way we can access the empty value, remember I said that this particular property returns a data type we have not used yet, bool, but I will declare a variable of type bool anyway, and we'll talk about bool in the next module. And I will call this DEC empty. And now we can access the property, and the way we access a property of an object is we put the object name, dot, and the property name. Now the way we can tell that we're accessing a property, instead of calling or invoking a method, a constructor is a special kind of method, is that when we call the constructor or a method, like print, we put parentheses. An open parenthesis and a closed parenthesis, and in the next lecture we'll see that sometimes we even put stuff between those parentheses. When we access a property, we don't put parentheses, and that's how you can tell that you're accessing a property rather than calling a method. So now we can just print out whether or not the DEC is empty, like so, and I'll control F5, and you'll see that DEC empty is false. As we would expect, booleans are true or false. The DEC has 52 cards in it, so the empty property returns false. I will point out that in this particular case, we don't actually have to declare a DEC empty variable if we don't want to. I'm going to grab some of this code and move it there, and then I'll comment out this code. Here's a trick in MonoDevelop. If you highlight some lines of code and right-click, you can toggle line comments, and so now those lines of code are commented out. And instead of using the variable here, I will just access the property directly. So instead of putting it into a variable and then printing out the variable value, I'll just say print out the value of the property. And if I control F5 again, you'll see that we get the same exact results. And that's all there is to accessing a property of an object. In this lecture, we learned how we can access the state of an object by accessing one of its properties. In this particular case, the DEC class's empty property.